there's two groups of listeners that should be paying very close attention. The first group is listeners that invest in solar assets. Whether you're a large investor or a small investor, Sol REIT gives you an opportunity to really maximize the return on your investment by minimizing the amount of capital you need to invest. As I said earlier, we tried to eliminate all the capital constraints to enable a developer to build a project with not a single penny out of his pocket after he gets to NTP.
Today on the Clean Power Hour, your structured finance for the solar industry. My guest today is Sol REIT. And my listeners will recognize the name Jim Spano, but we have a new face on the show today, and that is a gentleman by the name of Mark Settles, who was hired to be the CEO of Sol REIT. I want to encourage our listeners to check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel there or listen to the podcast on all of your favorite audio players. Without further ado, Structured Finance with Mark Settles, CEO of Sol REIT. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tim. Glad to be here.
So psyched to see you guys bringing this REIT product to the solar industry. And I've known Jim since I went to my first SPI in 2018 and, now have I like to say a pony to ride where we could benefit from Sol REIT. But how do you come to the solar industry, Mark? Give us a little bit of your background.
Sure, Tim. My background is in fixed income. I worked for just under 20 years for JP Morgan Asset Management as a fixed income trader, as well as a client portfolio manager, both in London and New York. And so that depth of experience in fixed income was attractive to the co-founders as they began to put together the leadership team for Sol REIT. I also have extensive experience in the executive suite at Fannie Mae and at JP Morgan.
Excellent. And, Jim Spano, the founder of Sol REIT and a previous version of that company called Radiant REIT, came from the real estate business, was an early adopter of solar in, I think, 2004, super early adopter. And, you guys are in the Northeast. The Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast are some of the best, most developed solar markets in the United States. And now we see the entire country coming online. So it's really great timing. And we need to do this as quickly as possible for a lot of reasons, but it's a great opportunity for financiers, for developers, for construction companies, and of course for people who are looking for a career. It's a win-win-win. So Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit about the ideation of Sol REIT? Why did you create the company and who is your target audience?
So the idea was really born three and a half years ago. And over the course of a couple of years, we developed the program, the product, had a little kickstart, and then had to take a step back and rebrand as Sol REIT. And what Sol REIT, where Sol REIT plays in the marketplace is we fill that gap that's been missing in solar finance for the last 15 years that I've been in the business. Sol REIT is really meeting the needs of developers as opposed to funding the aggregators that have accumulated developers' projects into portfolios and then structured finance off of those portfolios. So we're bringing that structural finance level down to the developer level to enable those developers to capture the value that they've created as we discussed in the past.
So what is, from your perspective, Sol REIT? What is your value proposition and why should our listeners sit up and listen?
Sure. Our value proposition, number one, you couldn't be more accurate. The timing and the environment is fantastic, whether it's the policy tailwind coming out of Washington, D.C., and just the pivot from fossil fuels to clean energy in general. So we're excited. We think that we found the appropriate some fraction in the marketplace, some fractionality in the marketplace that we can focus on. The value proposition for Sol REIT simply is we want to be your structured finance partner from cradle to grave. So when you think about a developer, an EPC, anywhere from NTP right through COD, we want to be your solution provider. You won't have to take $1 out of your pocket from NTP right through COD the way our value proposition is structured. And what we're doing, Tim, is we're providing 100% of the construction costs at NTP. So once you're at NTP, 100% of the construction costs will convert your construction loan into a permanent loan and also arrange for you, when appropriate, tax equity. So the economics, from my perspective, the finance guy's perspective, look like they're improving as you move from NTP to COD. We just want to give the opportunity for small and medium-sized developers to, first of all, Tim, focus on what they do, their area of expertise, which is solar development, and let us focus on what we do as finance folks to be your partner along the way on that journey.
Yeah, it really is an accelerant, right? Money is always an accelerant in whatever the business is. And for our listeners who don't know, what is structured finance?
Sure. Structured finance is when you have a specific project and you're financing against the income and the revenue streams and collateralizing your debt with the project itself, as opposed to having personal guarantees or other recourse type financing. There's recourse and non-recourse. Non-recourse financing means that the lender is relying strictly on the project itself for repayment. When the project doesn't meet the lender's underwriting guidelines, then you will often step out of a structured finance deal and go into a traditional finance where the developer actually borrows the money against his other collateral and his business income, and then finances his projects on his own. So structured finance is really financing around a specific project and relying on that project to meet all the obligations to the lender.
And is one better than the other in the eyes of the customer?
Absolutely. When you're working on a structured finance deal, you're typically going to have non-recourse financing, meaning that the developer or the owner of the project doesn't have personal recourse. He's not personally liable for that loan. The only party liable for the loan is the corporate entity or the individual entity that owns the asset itself, the project itself. So clearly, if you don't have to provide any type of recourse, it's always going to be in your best interest, unless you're trying to get lower rates, in which case you may offer recourse to get a lower rate, even in a structured finance deal. Typically, when companies borrow money, they're borrowing money against the revenue of the company and the sales and the business of the company itself. With structured finance, it's strictly relying on the one project. All the other companies' businesses and assets and activities are not at risk. Only that one specific project.
Mm-hmm. And my understanding is that this type of financing that Sol REIT offers is off balance sheet and relatively short term, for the life of, for say, construction. I know that there are different stages that you can bring finance to the table for, but am I missing something about that? Project is getting to NTP. Sol REIT steps in to allow developers or EPCs to basically take control of a project and finance the construction of it. But then they could well exit the project, and some longer term owner is going to take control at COD.
Sure. Yeah, I can speak to that. What Sol REIT is doing is providing debt to a developer, recognizing that the developer's created value in getting a project to NTP. And what we do is we look at that value and we monetize it, and we recognize that that's collateral. So what we're really looking to do is we're looking to provide the developer with sufficient capital, in fact, 100% of the capital necessary to get that project from NTP, notice to proceed, to COD, which is your commissioning date or your operations date. In order to get that project built, typically developers don't have the capital and can't access the capital without a balance sheet to support it. What Sol REIT is doing by providing non-recourse project finance directly to the developer, we're enabling the developer to have the capital not just to build it, but our construction capital is then converted to long-term debt, so that when the developer gets his project to COD, he has the option. He can either begin to build a balance sheet and keep that project on his balance sheet and accumulate other projects, and then you build up your own balance sheet, or he can sell at COD and just get a multiple of the fee that he would have earned had he sold at NTP. The only reason a developer will ever sell at NTP is because they can't access the capital to get it to COD. If you can get a project constructed, understanding that solar projects, unlike my traditional real estate development business, where I'm building a mall and I have multiple coordination of infrastructure and electric and plumbing, and I mean, there's just, with the solar field, is really just an erector set with an electrical connection. Obviously, it's a little bit more technical when you get into the inverter, the transformers and the switchgear, and making sure everything is properly constructed. But for the most part, it's a very simple construction process, and it takes a very short period of time. So it may take you a year and a half to develop a project and 3 to 6 months to build it. You literally make as much money building it as you made in that 3 to 6 month period as you made developing it when you took all the risk. So now, let's say if you made $1 value of a fee in developing a project, and you can make another $1.50 by getting it constructed, everybody would do it if they had the capital. The problem is that that capital has just not been available to the market. And that's primarily because lenders don't look at a solar system as infrastructure, as real estate. We do at Sol REIT. We're a real estate investment trust. We're acquiring real estate assets, and the mortgage on your solar system is a real estate asset, and we're prepared to look at it as a real estate asset and to treat it as a real estate asset, as an infrastructure project, which basically means that financing it should be financed on a long-term basis. It's infrastructure. It's going to be there for 20, 30 years. Banks have always treated solar systems as pretty much as equipment, and they financed it under the traditional equipment loan or finance programs, which are mini perm programs, 7 to 10 year term. The presumption being that this equipment, we don't know what it's going to be worth at the end of 7 to 10 years. The truth is, the equipment isn't worth very much from the day that you install it. What the value is really the underlying revenue contract that system supports. You can't take up if you build a solar system on somebody's roof, you can't take it down and build it on somebody else's roof. It's cheaper to literally build a brand new system on the roof than to take it down and construct it. So there's no real collateral value in a solar system, unlike real estate, where the building is the building, it'll be there and it can just be repurposed for a new use. There's no new use for that solar system. So you're really relying on that revenue contract. And that's where, as a lender, we're very comfortable with the technology, with the construction. We've been in solar since it began, literally. So I think the value that we're bringing is we're enabling that developer to build his own balance sheet or to capture that extra value during that short period of time and literally double to 2.5 times the fees that he could earn by not taking a developer fee, but taking the proceeds from the project sale with a fully financed project.
So there are several points of significant friction, though, in solar project development. And that's kind of what I'm so excited about Sol REIT for, is to be able to work with EPCs and developers, help them have the financial tools that make good business sense. There's always more traditional forms of financing, and commercial lenders are embracing solar, wind, and storage en masse, the larger ones, and now even the regional banks here in Illinois are getting in the game and understanding that this is a totally financeable industry. We're talking about solar panels, steel racking, and inverters. This is tried and true equipment. It is mature from a technological perspective, right? We're dealing with relatively mature technology. It's just new in some markets, like here in the Midwest, the market I'm in, and but we're working nationally, and we're a small EPC, and so we need partners, we need developers, we need financiers. We will eventually be the bank with our Babcock and Wilcox ownership that now owns a stake in Fossler Solar. But let's talk a little bit about the nitty-gritty. So, if I'm a community solar developer and I've got a portfolio of, 10 to 100 megawatts, how does that come into play? When do you want to get involved in those kinds of opportunities?
We believe we can add the greatest value once they're at NTP. They've got some soft costs sunken into the project, et cetera. And doing my research, Tim, and coming on board, I wanted to understand from a business perspective, what problem are we solving for? And one of the first things I learned is that developers are largely asset rich and cash poor as they approach NTP and are at NTP, shovel in hand. And so that's usually the impetus for them selling into aggregators or et cetera. And what we want to do is get a little cash in their hands. So let's just use a $10 million project as an example. And let's say you got some sunken costs of $500,000 to $1 million, et cetera, perhaps even more as you get to NTP. What we're doing is loaning you 100% of your construction costs up front and up to 90% of fair market value of the project. And so you may look at something, a loan that might be as large as $9 million on a $10 million project. That developer is getting some of their cash back. No money out of pocket from NTP to COD. And as you know, the economics could and should improve there with the various tailwinds that you and I have been talking about. You throw in the potential of arranging some tax equity, Tim, at that point, and that's up to, as you know, up to 35% of that $10 million hypothetical project that you and I are tossing around now. That's $3.5 million off of that $9 million loan. So you're looking at some real equity. You're looking at a capital stack that's not that bad for that developer as they have the opportunity to move past COD right there. So whether it's the economics, the peace of mind to focus on the solar piece, the peace of mind to not have to sell to aggregators, we think that's really the value proposition that we bring. And also another point, you started to mention banks. That's fine. But as you talked about Jim Spano's experience in solar development and finance, our other co-founders are also Kevin Adler, heavy experience in solar development and finance. Brian Sidman, a long time, decades of experience in real estate development and finance. When you put all of that together, we're able to understand the value of the project and understand all the moving parts. And that's why you mentioned the regional banks and others getting involved. That's why when we convert to perm, we're more comfortable going higher in loan to value than a bank who doesn't understand solar like we do is willing to do. As you know, banks may go 50, 55, 60% maybe loan to value on the perm side. We're able to partner with you in a more economical way all the way through from NTP from construction to perm, much more economical than a bank could.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Clean Power Hour or viewing it on YouTube. We do have a great YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed, please go to cleanpower.group and hit that YouTube icon and subscribe to our channel. Of course, you can find all of our content on your favorite audio platform as well. So please give us a rating and review. I wanted to let you know that we are partnered with the Midwest Solar Expo this year. Check it out, midwestsolarexpo.com. You can get a 15% discount with our code, which is CPH15. We will also put that in the show notes, CPH numeral 15. The Midwest Solar Expo is the premier B2B solar and clean energy event in the region. It hosts over 450 clean tech executives from around the country, and it's a lovely event in Minneapolis, June 20th to 22nd. So please check it out. Back to the show. Gotcha. Let's speak a little more to why you decided this was a vital product for mid-market developers and EPCs.
Sure. As I said earlier, I've been in the business since 2004, 17 years now. And the one thing that I've recognized over all those years is that the value always gets pushed upstream to the capital. You know, the developer that creates all the value has to sell too early in the overall process to capture the value that he's actually created. So what happens is he sells to these aggregators, these middle market people, and these middle market people, they get capital from, you know, the large banks, the large investment banks, the Goldmans and the BlackRocks and so forth. They get their capital and they go out and they buy the projects from these developers at NTP, and then they use the capital from the investment banks to get these constructed. They construct a portfolio, and then they sell the portfolio at a significant increase in value. What we're trying to do is pull as much of that value downstream to the developer so that if the developer can access the capital like that aggregator did, so that he can get that project constructed. Now he's in the position where that aggregator was. So he's going to capture not just the fees that the developer earned, but he's now capturing that whole mid-market value that the aggregators have been getting. And we all know who the aggregators are. They're the guys that are buying all of our projects. Ultimately, they're funded by the investment banks. So why not allow the developer to build his own portfolio and then bring it over to the investment bank? Eliminate that middleman, capture all that value downstream. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish. And the reason we're doing that is because, and I'll give an example. My first project, my first portfolio of projects, and I'm going back to I started developing these in 2004. So, I mean, these are really early projects. Before, in fact, my first project was really not even an investment. It was a marketing scheme for a mall that I was developing. But going back to all of those years, there's the very first projects I built, we put into a portfolio. I sold it to an aggregator. The aggregator returned a 37% year-on-year return to his investors after his fees. And then they sold the entire portfolio to another larger investment bank. And that investment bank now all those investors made, on top of the 37% annual return, now they make this huge capital gain on the sale of the portfolio. When I realized that, and that's really, do a little bit of math. By I started those projects in 2004, 5, 6, 7. I wasn't able to transact because of the New Jersey SREC market. If we all remember, it crashed. So I wasn't able to transact. By the time the market recovered and I was able to transact, it was 2013, I believe. 5 years later, 2018, I'm looking at this and saying, I sold that way too cheap. If I only had the capital to build it myself, I could have captured a 37% return and a huge capital gain. But instead, I had to pass it over to that aggregator. So in 2018, I started saying to myself, well, wait a second. Let's find a way to bring that capital to those developers so that they're not in the position of having to have that aggregator middle guy, and they can transact directly with the investment banks themselves. That's really what we're trying to accomplish. We think that it makes so much more sense for the hardworking developer that created the value, for him to be able to capture more of the value he's created and not to have to exit so early simply because of a capital constraint.
What, in terms of getting traction for Sol REIT, I mean, Jim Spano is one of the most connected people in the solar industry that I've ever met. And it's been great, being able to leverage that network, so to speak. But he doesn't know everybody. I run into people all the time who I'm surprised don't know about Sol REIT. And so what is it that you're doing to, get the word out, and feel free to tell our listeners how they can get more information about Sol REIT and at what stage of development. You talk a lot about NTP and COD, but these portfolios are years in the making. And so if you're not in the dialogue, a year before NTP, they are going to have queued up some next steps, right? And
Sure.
so, and that's my challenge as well as an EPC. I always need to be in the conversation as early as possible with the developers, building that trust and rapport and adding value in specific places if I can. So how do you see that? And I guess I'm curious, how does this translate from your previous work on Wall Street?
Sure. So one thing I'll address is as CEO, I have to know what some of the key indicators are that gives me reconnaissance on our pipeline, upcoming deals, what's likely to be coming down the road, basically visibility. One of the things that gives me visibility, Tim, is doing my research on earlier stage activity with earlier stage developers, right? And so I'm aware that investors and lenders are looking earlier stage than NTP. Very much aware of that. I have ears to the ground, and I'm gaining a lot of information about what's going on that's before NTP. And so that's not a part of our business model at this time, but it's something that I have to measure to gain visibility on my pipeline going forward. Another question you asked about is how are we getting the word out about Sol REIT? And so when I was asked to be the founding CEO, one of the business verticals that I set up, and when you set up business verticals, in order to set it up for success, you want to make sure you have the talent and technology and the contacts to set yourself up for success and deliver excellence. One of the business verticals is investor relations and marketing. And so we hired a woman-owned public relations firm based in Miami, Florida, to help us think about how to message our value proposition, how and where to message our value proposition. One of them, Tim, is social media. So I'm really excited about some of the momentum that's going on in social media with Sol REIT. Another is for Jim and I. Jim's head of originations and one of the co-founders, Jim Spano, for Jim and I to get out there on podcasts and talk about what we're doing. More specifically, who we're doing it for, Tim. We're not trying to boil the ocean. We're very focused on the size of deals and the types of deals that we're doing. And so that kind of is a nice segue into my background. My background is a fixed income portfolio manager. So building a fixed income portfolio at JP Morgan, the first thing they taught me is diversification is what's going to resonate with investors and people that you're building these portfolios for. So as a CEO of Sol REIT, the number one business vertical that I have, and I spend 25 hours a day on, is loan portfolio management and risk management. And so I work very closely with our chief investment officer on the making sure we have a portfolio that's, number one, the weighted average credit quality of the portfolio is investment grade. And number two, that we're doing our best to diversify the sources of offtake within the portfolio. And so you've got one thing that comes up, Tim, that's really a trend. And the other thing that's out there is Jim's relationships. And I think what I want to talk about is the trend of community solar and also Jim's relationships. So with Jim's relationships, we do get diversification as far as the offtake or the user, right? Our first couple of loans closing are school districts, hospital systems, and things like that. But that said, when I look at the visibility on our pipeline, Tim, a lot of it is community solar. So you got to really roll your sleeves up and understand that, and try to keep your finger on the pulse state by state. Because community solar and the governance and oversight and regulation around that is different in Illinois than it is in New York, and a little different in Minnesota than it is in New York. So leveraging my background in portfolio management and risk management, we care a heck of a lot about concentration and measuring concentration in those various offtake areas.
What do you mean by concentration?
Percentage of portfolio. So if I have our pipeline is just over 200 million right now in loan applications. And so the first thing I ask is, what percentage of that is community solar, C&I, whatever it is? None of it's utility. We're not going into that big swimming pool, that part of the swimming pool. But it's very important. You can assess themes and trends by understanding the type of offtake, and then how to gear yourself up from an underwriting perspective and also from other perspectives, right? If it's heavy community solar, then your government relations, whether it's state government, federal government, has to be really on their toes and understanding themes and trends, so that our portfolio manager, our chief investment officer, can do the appropriate type of underwriting. So that's a mouthful to show you how my background in portfolio management will assist us in being good fiduciaries over investor money, and also being able to be good lenders and appropriate lenders on the solar side. Sure.
One of the vagaries of the market right now in the fall of 2021 going into 2022 is there going to be a whole lot of delays because of the availability and price of solar modules, for example?
It's also the steel. It's like, almost
yes.
Every part of a solar system today, the pricing has gone up.
But how do you handle those vagaries? Because what was $1.20 a watt is now $1.40 a watt because of price increases. And then in 6 months, that's going to be different. So I'm just curious, how do you guys tackle that problem?
Yeah, it's actually simpler from the lender's end than the developer's end. We're looking at what the revenue stream is, and we're establishing a fair market value off the revenue stream. So the cost of the system just shows the return to the developer and what his profit will be. The value is established based on the revenue it's going to produce. So if I take a value of X and I have a cost of Y, the delta between the X and the Y is really the equity that I'm going to achieve if I get this system constructed, right? So what I'm looking at is saying if that equity supports, if the revenue supports the debt service coverage on the loan, the developer's cost becomes the developer's cost. So if your cost increases midstream in the middle of construction, it just means that your profit margin got squeezed. Presumably you have some margin in your financial model to cover any contingencies of that nature. But if you don't, it just squeezes your margins on the top end. But as a lender, it doesn't really change what we're able to do. We're lending against the revenue stream, the fair market value, the present value of that revenue stream.
Gotcha. And then if the if the developer or the EPC wants to sell at COD, are you becoming the long-term owner, or who is taking ownership of these assets?
That's the beautiful thing. If the developer gets our capital to construct it, then it's also coming with the term loan. So you effectively have a cradle to grave finance of that product. So once you get it constructed, it has assignable debt already attached to it, because remember, we're project finance. We're relying on the project, not the owner. We want to make sure the owner is maintaining it properly and has that experience, but we're relying on the project to actually create the revenue to pay off the debt. So as long as we're comfortable that we have a solid project, and bear in mind, we have a low debt to loan to value ratio after we convert the term debt after we convert the construction debt to the term debt, because you're capturing, particularly as an EPC, you're capturing 100% of the margin. So you're going to have, in fact, I have a project now, just by way of example, where I have like a little over a $15 million value. The developer only needs an $8.9 million loan during construction. Once it's constructed and I bring in tax equity, which is a third of that 8 million, roughly a third of the 8 million, I'm going to be down to a $5.5–6 million loan with a significant equity position remaining. So, I think the magic to what we're doing is enabling the developer to get it to COD and then to have the choice to either sell it as a fully financed, basically an income asset. At that point, you're selling really the income, or they can maintain it on their balance sheet. If they sell it, then they capture a capital gain. They keep it on their balance sheet. Then they can build up a series of these and eventually transact an entire portfolio and make that extra value or that extra capital gain that you're going to value from the sale of a large portfolio as opposed to individual small projects. As we all know, if you can get $50 to $100 million worth of assets on your books, on your balance sheet, which we're happy to loan you, then you're going to be able to go out to the market, securitize them, sell those assets, pay off my loan, and you're going to do a heck of a lot better when you price a large portfolio like that, because you have a whole different set of buyers that are looking for, that they're able to provide lower costs of capital, which means that you're going to get a greater value. Now, you mentioned EPC earlier, and I want to focus on that for a moment as well. There is an incredible amount of value that Sol REIT offers to EPCs that are looking to build a balance sheet themselves of assets. In other words, EPCs that want to build, and instead of building for other people, build for themselves and build their own balance sheet. The real value there is if we're, as an EPC, you contract with me as a developer. I rely on the bank to loan me, and I have to meet certain obligations for the bank to release milestones, as you know. You then have to rely on me to make payments against your milestones. So in order for you as the EPC to get paid, you have to have a developer and his lender saying, yes, you've met the milestones to their satisfaction. When you're the developer and the lender lends you, and you're the EPC, when the lender lends you as the developer the money, you decide when you pay those milestones, and when your EPC company has met the milestones, you can advance them, you can pay them in arrears. You control that cash flow. So you're controlling the cash flow from NTP all the way through to COD. And it's important to understand when I say controlling the cash flow, you can lower or increase the developer fee. If the developer fee, for example, is too high and you're concerned about a IRS, then you look at your costs. Maybe because you're the EPC, you're building lower than market. You can increase your margin on the EPC side. You can still be well below market so that you have no concerns with your ITC or any tax equity investors that you have. You manage that cash flow. Then as the EPC, once you've been paid, you can decide whether you want to pay in a carryover year, whether you want for bonding purposes, maybe you need to book additional revenue. You have the ability to pre-book that revenue, or maybe you need to push revenue into the next year for tax purposes. You have the ability to defer or delay payments. Once I, as a lender, make that loan, you now control when you disperse that money directly to your EPC company, because you're basically the same thing. You're the developer, the owner, and the EPC contractor. Mm-hmm. Having complete control over your cash flow and having the ability to not build profit margin, taxable, ordinary income, taxable income to your EPC company. You can avoid the markup and just leave it as equity. Now, as equity, you never pay tax on it. You're still getting the return on your investment through the PPA. So you're getting all of your revenue in, but now you've managed to convert ordinary income to a capital gain income when you sell that asset, assuming you sell it as COD and you have you meet your 18 months for a long-term capital gain. But the whole point is that you have a lot more control over the cash flows, when you have control over the cash flows, you also have control over the taxation, your financial statements of the various companies, so that you can shore up one company if let's say your EPC company is having a bonding issue. Well, push contract income in and demonstrate that you have known cash flow. Remember, when you're the EPC and the owner decides, and the owner can commit to make payments to the EPC on certain dates. You basically have complete control over managing your cash flow, which from a banker's perspective and your bonding company's perspective, that's magic.
Yeah,
so there's a tremendous amount of value add to a developer that's also an EPC contractor that wants to become an owner.
And the long and short of it is you can get more projects done in less time, seems to me.
Now, even if you're a well-funded EPC, you got plenty of capital, wouldn't you rather use your capital to go out and develop and build your business, build more business, rather than funding? The amount of capital it takes to fund a $10 million project wipes out the capital for an EPC, wipes out all your operating income. Leave your operating income operating. Let your profit stay to build, to grow the business. Let the big capital come from the outside party. Let us provide that capital. Why use your own capital when you can use other people's money?
One of the weak links in this equation to me seems to be the PPA. What are your thoughts on power marketing, and how sophisticated is that marketplace in general?
Good question. Obviously, the PPA is the revenue contract that supports the debt. So it's incredibly important. It's the real value of a solar system, not the actual, panels. The panels are pretty much, they have a recycling value. That's about it. So it's really the power contract, the PPA or the ESA, Energy Service Agreement, or the Power Purchase Agreement. Those contracts, if you have a good counterparty to your contract, then you have increased value because your cost of capital, the risk will be lower, your cost of capital would be lower. So that the revenue contract's extremely important. Now, what we're finding is the revenue contracts are becoming shorter. They're being compressed. We started with 20 and 25 year PPAs. Now we have 5, 10, 12, 15 year PPAs. In fact, state of New Jersey, any government contract can't be more than 15 years. So the maximum PPA in New Jersey for any government contract is 15 years. Well, you have an asset that's going to be 30, 35 year asset. So when you have a revenue contract that's limited like that, what we're going to look at is, what is your site control? If you own the property, do you have a long-term lease? Is there something else? Is there some means to use that solar system after the PPA? Is there some residual value that we can assess based on the ability to sell power into the grid, to even sell power below the PPA right back to the same party should power rates come down. So there's, we want to look at what the value outside of the PPA. There's always I shouldn't say always. There's often a residual value outside of the actual revenue contract, but the revenue contract will determine. Our whole program looks at that revenue contract and equates that to the life of the asset with whatever residual is there. So if you have a 10-year PPA, you're looking at a 10-year a 10-year loan, which means you're going to amortize over 10 years as opposed to the contract that has a 20-year PPA. And if you think about that, if you had a $100 cost and a 10-year PPA, you have to recover through your revenue $10 each year just to repay the amortization, the $100 over the 10 years. But if you had a revenue contract that lasted 20 years, that asset's going to be there. So now, instead of paying $10 a year, you're paying $5 a year. And what that does is it frees up $5 that can go into your pocket as the owner of the system in cash flow. So we always try and extend the PPA and suggest developers try and get the longest PPA you can, because that's going to generate that much more cash flow after you have your debt service, covered. So when you have a shorter term PPA, yeah, we can still provide the loan, but there's not going to be a lot of net cash flow. So when you have a short PPA, developers are probably, in most instances, they're probably going to be better off selling the asset, capturing that big 2 to 2.5 times the fee they would have earned at NTP. But if they hold on to it, it's not going to generate, because it'll have tremendous value at the end of 10 years because you have no loan and now you have, all your revenue, right? And you have no principal to repay. But for the first 10 years, you have no real cash flow. And I think most developers are really interested in that cash flow. That's why they sell at NTP. So you should really try and get the longest revenue contract you can, the longest PPA you can. Even if you have to do it at a bigger discount, it'll have more value.
And as far as how are developers finding PPA off-takers, what are the means and methods to that?
That's a really, that's the magic of success in this industry. And I think the smart developers are developing relationships with real estate companies, particularly companies that have multiple properties, that by developing those relationships, you're able to rinse and repeat. You're not constantly spending your time and your effort out trying to market and look for new projects. Very, very difficult to go and especially in the commercial market that we're in. Very difficult to cold call or knock on doors. Yeah, you can be successful and there's sales guys that you can hire and you'll get some leads. But developers aren't going to do that. Most developers are reaching out into their networks, whether they're real estate guys, whether they're accountants, whether they're attorneys, whether they're financiers. They reach into their network, and there are brokers out there that market projects. Of course, when you go through one of those, everybody's bidding on it, so it's a race to the bottom. Or you can go out and try and develop your own leads, which basically means try and reach out to any relationships you have that have relationships with real estate investment trusts, with funds that own large properties in their businesses, or businesses that own multiple properties, manufacturing companies and so forth that, are regional or national that have multiple properties. Ideally, developers, especially if they don't have a network established, stay in the States with strong solar incentives. You'll have you're gonna have the race to the bottom, but there's still enough margin to make it worth your while. I've never been one myself I don't see the value in going out trying to originate projects on my own. I've always worked with other developers, other real estate, other attorneys, other accountants, other financial planners And that's where most of my business has come from in the past. It's all referral based.
And I think many projects are in this boat today where they're leveraging a whole variety of types of financing, but let's just talk about one, commercial lending versus Sol REIT. What are the differences, and what can a user anticipate? Being onboarded into Sol REIT, are there costs involved, and how long does it take for you guys to process an application?
What I'm doing my research, Tim, and coming on board as a founding CEO, I definitely wanted to look at the competitive landscape and how we might differentiate ourselves with our value proposition. One of them is versus a traditional bank, perhaps a regional bank that's getting involved regionally with solar developers. The first thing that I found is our depth of expertise in solar development and finance far surpasses that of most regional banks or even some of the larger banks. So those are not our direct competitors. It would be more middle market types of banks. Our experience far surpasses that in real estate development and finance and in solar development and finance, which allows us to be quicker with the pen and to be a one-stop solution for you. So once again, what I mean by that is a developer might say, I'm going to deal with one lender up until NTP. I'm going to deal with another. You got another lender you got to deal with when you flip from construction to perm. So you're looking at different checkpoints where you may be paying fees. You're only paying fees with Sol REIT one time, and we are your structured finance partner all the way through, from NTP, mechanical completion, COD, all the way through, and also arranging for you. You don't have to do it on your own. Arranging for you the tax equity piece when appropriate. And so when you put all that together, I really see some value there versus, and then loan to value. They're just not going to be where we are loan to value, either upfront or on the perm side, Tim. And then you didn't mention it, but something else is important is I mentioned tailwinds out of Washington that are very favorable for clean energy, and more specifically tax credits for anything related to clean, and in this case for solar. And so when your developers and others are doing their clicks throughout the day to gather their news, you're probably hearing about direct pay. And direct pay is a great incentive. It's going to be a nice tailwind, a nice incentive for developers. The only difference is we're giving you the economics up front, and there's no clarity on when you're going to get your direct pay payment. You can apply, but it's built into our term sheets that we're going to arrange that for you. So it's really getting it quicker. How long does the process take? We're going to be quicker to pen. Definitely half the amount of time that a regional bank would be able to move you from indicative term sheet to final term sheet. We're looking at half the time, Tim.
And what is that? Is it 3 months?
Well, let's look. I mean, what is it to NTP? Maybe 6 to 9 to actually build it. A megawatt, maybe 3 or 4 months. But
I mean, from time of application to time of signing the financing.
Yeah, to funding.
Sorry?
To funding, right?
Yeah.
So and again, part of my research coming in was to think about how can I make what I call the roadmap. So the journey from loan application to funding is a road that is near and dear to my heart, because we are going to be client-centric, user-friendly, and automated, okay? And that's the goal. Why? Because I want Tim to be a reference for me as we leave this podcast and say, those guys are streamlined as it pertains to loan application to funding. Those guys are streamlined, they're efficient, and it's as frictionless as possible. And it's all automated, right? I want you to be able to walk away and say that to the developers, because that client experience, Tim, is what's going to help us scale. It's going to help Sol REIT scale. And so we are automated. And I think being streamlined and efficient means getting up every day and thinking about, am I user friendly, yes or no? And I can tell you as a CEO, I'm the first one to go into the system every day to make sure that we are as user friendly as possible. So from loan application to underwriting, half the time of a middle market bank, probably half the time that it would take to construct a project.
And we'll get Jim's perspective, but from your perspective, what else are you excited about? What do you want people to know? And how can our listeners help you and get involved?
Sure. The way to find out more about Sol REIT or to fill out a loan application is to contact me directly at Mark, M-A-R-K, at solreit.com, SOL-REIT.com. We look forward to being your structured finance partner.
Well, in our last few minutes, Jim, what else should our listeners know about Sol REIT? And I guess, what are you most excited about looking forward as the solar industry continues to mature and develop?
Well, first, I think what your listeners want to, there's two groups of listeners that should be paying very close attention. The first group is listeners that invest in solar assets. Whether you're a large investor or a small investor, Sol REIT gives you an opportunity to really maximize the return on your investment by minimizing the amount of capital you need to invest. As I said earlier, we tried to eliminate all the capital constraints to enable a developer to build a project with not a single penny out of his pocket after he gets to NTP. If you're an investor, that's incredibly important to you. You can buy projects that you're buying at NTP. You can come to me, and rather than flipping to the aggregator, you can finance them yourself. If you're an EPC, incredibly valuable, because all of the developers that have been contracting, or the owners that have been contracting with you to build, well, what the developers do is they sell it to the aggregator, and then the aggregator contracts with the EPC to build it. Now the EPC can go straight to those developers and say, hey, don't sell it to the aggregator, sell it to me. That way I know I'm going to get paid when I build it, because I'm going to be the owner and I'm going to be getting the debt that's going to be there to pay myself. So why do I want you to sell it to the aggregator? Now I got to worry about the aggregator paying me as the EPC. I'd rather you sell it to me for the same price you're going to sell it to the aggregator. And now I control it. And now I build it for myself. And I build it with no money out of my pocket. So why let the aggregator, basically what I'm doing is I'm saying to the EPC and to the small, mid-sized developer, you no longer need aggregators. You don't need their capital anymore. I can give you much cheaper capital in the form of debt instead of equity. Think about it. I'm not going to mention any names again, but these big aggregators that come out and they buy EPC companies, they buy large development companies. And what do? They buy it. How do they buy it? Equity. They own it. They get the value. I'm coming to you with the same proposition, but instead of saying, I want to own your business, I want to own your assets, I want to loan to you. I want to be your partner, but not your equity partner. I want to be your debt partner, much lower cost of capital. That's the value proposition that Sol REIT is bringing to the developers and to the EPCs. And then in terms of the future, my goodness, we're in the most exciting industry in the world, never mind the country, in the entire world right now. We're some of the industry veterans that have been around since the beginning, understand the market, understand the players. People have confidence in us. This is an opportunity for developers to really, really, really capture the value that's available with an economy that's almost fully based on a renewable energy transition. When you have an economic recovery that's reliant on your industry and you're a developer in that industry with the opportunity to access the capital, to own the assets. My goodness, this is the best time since I've been in the solar industry. I'm going to say 2022 is probably going to be the best year we've had, and I'm hoping 23 and 24 will be top each of those. I'm very, very, very optimistic about the future of our industry.
Check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. You can find links to our YouTube channel and, of course, all the audio platforms. Please give us a like, thumbs up, share the content with your friends, and reach out to me. I love hearing from our listeners. If you have ideas for speakers or topics that you'd like us to cover here on the Clean Power Hour, reach out to me on Twitter, TG Montague, or on LinkedIn. I love to connect with folks on LinkedIn. I want to thank my guests, Mark and Jim, for coming on the show. Thank you so much. And let's grow solar and storage. I'm Tim Montague.